Hello, this is the Hermetic Hipster and welcome to my channel. Thank you for everyone who voted in the last video for your choice of which tradition to cover in this video. The results were very close between the Order of Hermes and the Dream Speakers, but the Dream Speakers in the end won out. However, the Hermetics pulled in some political favours to get the motion moved to an appeal, seeing their video getting bumped as a grievous insult. The correct quorum of masters were assembled through rigorous curtamane, and subclause Epsilon Belta was invoked, and elements of the Hermetic Code were rigorously reinterpreted to help for a favourable ruling so they could get justice they deserved. Unfortunately for them, the rest of the traditions were getting tired of the Hermetics' antics, so for once, the Kavadi are going to get what they deserve and will go first. The Dream Speakers, or Kavadi, are a monistic tradition who can best be defined by their interaction with spirits. They're a loose collection of different shamanistic and spiritual groups from around the world that share a similar style of magic, that of the invocation of spirits or otherworldly beings. The tropes of shaman, witch doctor, spirit healer, and tribal wise man are those embodied by the Kavadi, and they hold a seat of spirit on the Council of Nine, and are fairly strongly linked to this sphere with their preferred style, as it's an uncommon dream speaker who doesn't hold effects that use the spirit of sphere close to their core of their practice. Many animists, elementalists, and primarists have made their home in the dream speakers, but more unusual types of mages, such as urban shamans or techno-barbarians, are also in it. Many are drawn from various traditional cultural beliefs that often lack large structures and unified protocol, a habit that is mirrored in the dream speakers, whose large variety of practices make them greatly decentralized. Dream speakers do not come from a single culture or group, rather they are grouped together based on an apparently similar paradigm and set of beliefs. In that I touch on one of the main problems of the Kavadi in the world of Mage, that at their creation of the tradition, they were something of an afterthought to their fellow traditionalists, an irreverence that has arguably lasted into the modern nights. They were formed basically as a holding group for non-Babana shamanistic mages from around the world who were present at the founding of the traditions. Like the Ngoma, African ritual magic scholars, this was attributed to European mages, notably the Hermetics and Choristers, looking down on non-Europeans, and it flat out says that racism and Eurocentrism have a large part to play in this decision. I have a pretty big issue with this for two reasons. Firstly, I think it's pretty annoying to explain away real-world Eurocentrism of right-wolf writers, geek culture, and our society at large with made-up lore to justify it. We all have our built-in prejudices, this video editor included, and the early writers of Mage were no exception. The Kavadi were clearly written from a Eurocentric point of view, and reek of the noble savage and Orientalism. With thousands of traditions and religions we might lazily label as shamanistic or animistic, lumped into one persona. Our society's largest works of fiction indulge in these tropes, however, so I don't think there's any reason to demonize role-playing game writers in the early 90s, especially when Mage makes such a great effort to be open-minded and aware of its biases, even at the time of this was all written down. It galls me, however, that French, English, and Western European mages would look down their nose at non-Europeans for the sake of our modern understanding of racism that hadn't really developed at the time these events take place. Although not a backwater, Western Europe was greatly overshone at this period in time, with the Islamic world, African kingdoms, large empires in the Americas, not to mention China, being much more politically and scientifically important, so the idea that they were the ones calling the shots just feels wrong. I find it hard to suck up as much more than a glossing over of the internal bias of the writers and excusing it with in-world lore, and even giving unfair labels to the Hermetics and Choristers that I don't believe they deserve. I do find it especially galling as the Babana exist in such great detail and as a unique group, giving Europe's faux past as told by neo-pagans priority over living, breathing traditions and cultures from around the world. But however you slice it, that's the dream speakers we have, and when you examine this group, do remember that normal dream speakers only exist in the mind of those who haven't confronted their own ideas about witch doctors and tribal wise men as portrayed by Hollywood. With that off my chest, I normally talk about the history of the group, but again, there's no real shared history before they were artificially created by others. However, they might just have something stronger than that, in the form of one of the most resilient paradigms that exists in Mage. Belief that nature, animals, and the elements and the world that surrounds us having some kind of spiritual reflection more than what our normal senses see, is universal in all cultures around the world. Since coming together, many dream speakers have explored this universal belief, and with expeditions into the spirit realms and deep umbra to attempt to find some common creation myth to unify themselves. At first, many of these groups that now found themselves under the dream speaker banner did not see eye to eye, having no reason to work together. But eventually the shared worldview and great efforts by forward-thinking dream speakers drew the tradition more closely together. During the colonial era, the cultures and civilizations of the dream speakers are connected to began to gradually fall victim to European exploitation and aggression, especially in Africa and America. The group attempted to reach out for their fellow traditionalists, but were afforded little help, in part due to them not really caring, and also that the traditions were under pressure from the same groups in their own territories. The 19th and early 20th century were a dark time for the dream speakers, with many of the groups they lived and worked among experiencing great disruption, and many of the ways of life that relied on their abilities becoming obsolete. The consensus also began to shift as well, with the Order of Reason and later the Union spreading their teachings along railroads, telegraph lines, and via science and reason. The tradition's greatest forte, their deep connection to the spirit world, began to become harder and harder to practice as maps codified previously spiritual areas and explorers and exploiters roamed every corner of the earth looking for value. But as the century went on, the tradition adapted, spreading their spiritualism among modern society, and importantly, embracing the spirits of the cities and technologies as friends and not just enemies. New technomancers and urban shamans joined their ranks, proving again the strength of the paradigm to survive. In modern nights, dream speakers are still one of the less formal traditions, still disparate, but with a high variety of styles and peoples in their group. This variety and relatively open-mindedness also lets the group form friendships with other supernaturals quite easily, with many dream speakers being friendly with Garu, who they share a lot of beliefs with. Their approach to spirits as well is markedly effective, and they believe in alliance and mutual benefit in their spirit negotiations, rather than how some traditions would shackle other spirits to their will. This has led them to gaining large popularity among spiritual groups, and even a young dream speaker can much more reliably get goodwill and fair pacts from spirits, whereas groups like the Wulong and Hermetics will be treated with suspicion. Dream speakers are greatly associated with their sphere of the seat of spirit, and it's a rare Kavadi, as I said, who doesn't have some level of proficiency in it. Elementalists may, however, also command fire and water as pure elements using forces, and life mages may embody animistic natures of the spirits. An important thing to remember for shamanistic mages, that is if you control fire, for example, you still only need to invoke the sphere of forces, even if your instruments is invoking the spirit of fire or heat, and that applies to all effects. Just because you're using a spiritual instrument and practice doesn't mean you have to invoke the spirit sphere unless you're losing any of the spheres listed as specs or something else appropriate. When making a dream speaker, I recommend doing one or two things. If you're choosing a more traditional character, I strongly recommend looking into specific cultural practices to embrace. It can be very easy to choose some naff form of generic shaman or witch doctor that don't really exist. So instead choose a specific spiritual practice and attempt to emulate it. This not only gives you a better foundation for instruments and practice, but also means you'll learn and research a culture you may not have been familiar with, only better informing your play in the game, but also broadening your personal horizons. The other style of Kavadi would be one without much basing in a traditional culture, maybe a technomancer or mage with a paradigm based on something more fantastical. Inspiration from the Avatar series, Ankara, occultism, or something more abstract like music or art can all have spiritual paradigms and be potential dream speakers. Technomages and urban shamans are an interesting concept as well, taking the trappings of shamanism and applying them to the urban jungle, replacing the traditional elements and religious hierarchies with concrete, steel, and even personifications of cities and districts. The Kavadi are a great tradition to play, having creative and fun foci to explore and a great variety of character styles to indulge in. Spirit deals and gameplay is almost the whole of the game into itself, so be prepared to get creative and discuss the rules and your paradigm with your ST before you start playing. Thank you for watching my guide to the Dream Speakers, and as before, please leave a comment below to help decide which group I'll cover next, and leave any questions you have about the world of Mage the Ascension for me to answer in the next video. This has been the Hermetic Hipster, and thank you for watching.